What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through the best fantasy football draft strategy if you are picking in the middle of the first round, so the 105 through the 108. Going to be going through some of the best early round targets, and then I'm going to be diving into 4 different mock drafts, one from each pick, just kind of showing you the different teams you can put together, these starts you can kind of put together here if you do have a mid first round pick. If you enjoy the video, do me a huge favor, hit that like button and subscribe. But let's just dive right into some of the round 1 targets. So this is ADP using 4 for 4, kind of just like some consensus data here. And the players in green, I think, are really solid values in this range. Yellow, I'm fine with them as picks. Red would prefer to avoid these players. And so at this point, I have a pretty clear top 2 with Jamar Chase as my 101 and then Bijan Robinson as my 102. I think once you're getting into 103, 104, I think you can make a case for a guy like Saquon, Jahmyr Gibbs. I think you can start making the cases for the wide receivers, but I do have a pretty clear top 6. And so that includes Jefferson, Gibbs, CeeDee Lamb. I think they're all viable selections at the 105, 106. So anywhere in this like mid first range, totally fine taking any of those players. After those top 6, I actually agree with consensus ADP because I have Puka as my 107. There is a tier break, but if those top 6 are off the board, Puka would be my pick. And then at the 108, you can see I have Neighbors, Amon-Ra, Genty, all in red. If my top 7 are off the board, I'd be taking Christian McCaffrey. Now I have him in yellow because ideally if you're picking at the 108, like your top 7 isn't off the board. But like at the 108, if Puka just went at the 107 and those top 6 are gone, CMC would be my guy here. I understand that might be controversial. He's very high risk, high reward. The 108 is really where I'm willing to kind of take that swing. Obviously, ideally, if you're in a ton of drafts, you're able to draft him more like late round 1. On some platforms, maybe even early round 2. But if push came to shove, CMC would be my selection there. I think Neighbors, Amon-Ra, Genty, these are all round 1 caliber picks, but they're just guys that I'd prefer to take in the late first as opposed to the middle of the first round. Now moving into some of those round 2 targets, going to start off with 2 guys who might not fall here a ton, but if they do, I think they're smash selections. We have Brock Bowers and Brian Thomas Jr. For Brock Bowers, I just think he has the opportunity to outproduce straight up like some of the other wide receivers in this range. Like I would not be shocked if he scored more points than a Drake London, an AJ Brown, some of these, wide receivers who maybe don't have the highest ceilings. And you just be getting an insane positional edge, right? Because like the tight end position outside of a couple of guys, there's not going to be a ton of productive options. And so Brock Bowers, getting him in like the mid-second round, I think is an awesome pick. And then for Brian Thomas Jr., I think he should be a 1-2 turn guy. I have as my 13th overall player as a 201. The dude was a wide receiver 1 for fantasy as a rookie. I think the situation has gotten better around him. Had a crazy breakout to end the year without his starting quarterback. Trevor Lawrence should be healthy. I love Liam Cohen coming in as the head coach. So I think Browers and BTJ might not be here a ton, but I think they are both great options. Then we get to Jonathan Taylor, and I think he'd be like a very fine mid-round 2 pick. I wouldn't say it's like a screaming value, but I think it's totally fine to start to consider taking him in this range. I think Drake London is a nice pick here. He doesn't necessarily have the proven ceiling of some of the wide receivers going ahead of him, but last year he proved he could be like a fringe wide receiver 1, finally had decent quarterback play and made that jump. If Penix takes a big leap, maybe that's how he turns in like a mid-tier wide receiver 1 season or better. But even if he doesn't take another huge leap, I feel good about him being like a back-end wide receiver 1. AJ Brown, I don't love in this range. I just think he lacks some upside. I think from a talent perspective, I'd be totally fine taking him in this range in a different situation. But with the Eagles, we just have a 3-season sample size where he's not going to be like that league winner, that huge difference maker for you. If you put him on some other, high volume passing attack, he would probably be a round 1 pick. We just know he's going to be more of like that back end wide receiver 1, which is fine in my opinion. In the late second, don't want to pay up for that in the middle of the second round. Trey McBride, I think, is an interesting pick here. I'd obviously prefer Bowers, but I still think he's like the next best option that can give you that positional edge at the tight end position. And then a couple of other players in red here, Josh Jacobs, Bucky Irving. I just don't think either of them have the upside at the position to warrant them going anything earlier than like late round 2. One guy who's going later than this, according to consensus ADP, but I think is very interesting is Ladd McConkey. I have Ladd and Drake London pretty much in the same bucket. He had a really nice late season breakout last year. He's the clear-cut wide receiver one for Justin Herbert. I'd be very willing to take him in the middle of the second round. Now looking at those mid-round 3 targets, you can see 3 players who I really like here in green, and then a lot of players in red. I really like the 2 Bengals players, T. Higgins, Chase Brown. Higgins might not have like that nuclear upside because he is paired with, the wide receiver 1 in Jamar Chase, but he just was the wide receiver 5 in points per game. Even if he comes back down to earth and is a back-end wide receiver 1 or like fringe wide receiver 1, I think that's fine value here in the mid-third. And then for Chase Brown is kind of volume dependent. The usage could fall off, but they force-fed him down the stretch last year. He's going to be on a good offense. He can catch passes. It's kind of a profile I'm just fine targeting here in the third. Then you can see Tyreek Hill. Didn't think I'd be super high on him, but I think, at this price tag, I'm willing to take on the risk when you consider the upside. Now, he's an aging wide receiver who relies heavily on his athleticism. He's coming off a down season, and typically when you have an older wide receiver who just flopped, you don't really want to target them the next year, but you see some of the other wide receivers in this range, like a JSN, Garrett Wilson, and it's tough to even imagine them having close to the same ceiling as a guy like Tyreek Hill, because what if he goes out there next year, is fully healthy, he's pretty much the same player he was in previous years, Tua stays healthy, and all of a sudden you're drafting like a top 3 wide receiver in points per game in round 3. Obviously, it could go the other way, and he continues to regress as a player, maybe continues to get banged up, but that's a swing I'm fine with here in the third round. And then a lot of players in red. I'm fine taking a quarterback in the middle of the third, but it would have to be Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen. Not interested in Jane Daniels here. And then like I talked about the wide receivers, I just don't love the upside. I'm fine taking JSN and Garrett Wilson late third. Middle of the third, a little rich for my blood. With Kittle, I get why you could consider him here. He's coming off a really strong season. Last year was just a lot better than, his last few years in terms of his production. Got a lot of weapons here. You have Ayuk coming back from injury. Jennings emerged. Ricky Pearsall could continue to produce at a higher level. And so I'm just not super confident he repeats. And then James Cook, I just think there are higher upside running backs. I think he is kind of a lower ceiling option. There are a few players that I'd feel very good about taking in this range that are just going later according to consensus ADP. The top 2 would be Rashee Rice and Breece Hall. I think Rashee Rice has like high-end wide receiver 1 upside. He was a monster in these 6 games to close the 2023 season. He was a monster in his first 3 games last year. You can get that dude 3-4 turn. I'd be willing to draft him at the 2-3 turn. And then Breece Hall, I just think he's a better running back option than a guy like James Cook. I'm a believer in the talent. I don't think the situation is as bad as some people. And then I'd also consider a guy like a Marion Hampton over some of the other dudes that I have here in red. So I know there's only 3 players that are like in green, but there are some people that I would consider that are just going later according to consensus. Now let's dive into some of the mock drafts here. This is from the 105, and just to kind of set the scene here, this is PPR scoring. The roster setup is 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, a tight end, 2 flex spots, and then 6 bench slots. So at the 105, this could have been a Jahmyr Gibbs or a CeeDee Lamb pick. In this draft, I did go with Jahmyr Gibbs. In round 2, someone who I mentioned, I do like Ladd McConkey in this range. This could have been a Trey McBride, maybe like a Bucky Irving. For me, I felt pretty decent about going with Ladd. And then I go with T. Higgins at the 305. Like I said, if I can get the wide receiver 5 in points per game from last year in the middle of the third, I'm going to hit the draft button pretty much every single time. And then round 4, I have kind of noticed in some of these drafts, when you get into round 4, when you are picking in the middle here, it can kind of feel like you're reaching in a larger tier, which is never great. And that is kind of how I felt here, where it's like, yeah, I could take my best available wide receiver, but they'd probably be available to me in the next round. So I ended up going with Kenneth Walker. I don't know if I'm going to have a ton of shares of him. I do think I'm higher on him, like relative to the other running backs than consensus, but it's also typically not a range where I'm going, to target a running back. Normally round 4, I'm looking at wide receiver, but I felt more confident in getting a wide receiver I liked in the 5th than I did with Kenneth Walker falling and me having a decent running back available there. So through 4 rounds, Jahmyr Gibbs, Kenneth Walker at running back, Ladd McConkey, T. Higgins at wide receiver. The round 5 wide receiver I was hoping would fall to me was Tet McMillan. I think he'd be my best player available in round 4, but like I said, felt more confident with him falling. This is something you're going to notice throughout the mock drafts. If I'm not going early tight end with one of those top 2, I'm probably just going to punt the position and get a late round guy. And then kind of similar at the quarterback position, just don't love reaching for the quarterbacks this year. So then we go back to running back in round 6 with Travion Henderson. Typically not going to be taken like round 4 and round 6 running backs, but I do think the value is fine, especially for Henderson in like the mid to late 6th. Then we go with 3 straight wide receivers: Calvin Ridley, Juwan Jennings, Matthew Golden. My typical rule of thumb is that I want to have wide receivers through my flex +2 that I feel like could be potential starters. We have that here with Ladd, Higgins, Tet, Ridley, Juwan Jennings, and then Matthew Golden. Then we hit up the quarterback and tight end positions. I go round 10, Justin Fields, which I just think is a great value. Of those later round quarterbacks, Justin Fields is my favorite. And then Tucker Kraft, in terms of like the later round tight ends, I think he's interesting. He's going to be on a good offense. I think he's a very good real life player. Maybe he doesn't command a lot of volume, but could hit in the touchdown department and could be live for a year 3 breakout. And then with our last 3 picks here, one of like the only like really later round wide receivers I'm interested in, I went with Kyle Williams. I think is a day 2 pick, kind of stepping into a wide open wide receiver room, could emerge here as a fun option for Drake May at quarterback. And then the last 2 picks, 2 running backs, we go Tyler Algier and Roshan Johnson. Algier more as like that pure handcuff, and then Roshan also with some handcuff upside, but somewhat of an ambiguous situation. Who knows what's going to happen there with that Bears running back room. So overall, I like our running back room. 2 guys who I feel very confident starting right away. Travion Henderson, who I think will build throughout the season. Very strong running back room. 2 guys who I have as wide receiver 1s. And then Tet McMillan, Calvin Ridley, Juwan Jennings, Matthew Golden. I'm not even a huge Golden guy, but I do think as a wide receiver 6, he's in a good spot. I love Fields as a late round pick. And then tight end, kind of weak, but fine given the strength at the other positions. Now moving into this next mock draft, the 106, this is going to be a wide receiver start. So we go CeeDee Lamb, Drake London, 106, 207. My best player available for those 2 picks. Then in the middle of the 3rd round, we get Chase Brown. I think getting Brown there is fun. I kind of feel like he's a somewhat similar bet to Kyren Williams. Kyren typically is going to go before him, but I feel like Chase Brown has had less competition, and there have been less signs that the Bengals are actually going to move off of like giving him a strong workload. Like, could they start to pivot his touches to like a Taj Brooks? Is Zach Moss going to get more involved? A Samaje Perine? Sure. But like back-to-back years, the Rams have brought in competition with Blake Corum and Jarquez Hunter. So mid-3rd round for potential volume monster on a top offense, totally in on that price tag. Then we hit up the wide receiver positions. A mid-round for Rashee Rice, I think could be like a league-winning pick. I think he has that type of upside. Travis Hunter, expect him to be controversial. He's the number 2 overall pick. Believe in the talent. I believe in the offense. It might be sketchy early on, but if he's good at wide receiver, I think he's just going to continue to build on his role. And then one of my favorite values here in round 6 is Jalen Waddle. He was kind of known as like this high floor, low ceiling option coming into last year. He completely flopped, and so now I think people are viewing him as like a low ceiling, low floor player, where I think he could easily bounce back to like that wide receiver 2 production. But if Tyreek Hill starts to slip, is regressing as a player as he's getting older, I think we could see Jalen Waddle just leap up and potentially take the mantle as the wide receiver 1 on this team. Not saying that's like the baseline expectation, but that is the upside that Jalen Waddle carries. Then I go with DeAndre Swift here. I did mention with the last mock how like it's an ambiguous backfield. I think Roshan's a fun late round pick, but I think in round 7, when you look at all the competition Swift has been able to dodge, they didn't bring in any legit competition in free agency. They brought in a day 3 running back pick in Kyle Monungai. Like, it feels gross, but I'm going to plug my nose and draft DeAndre Swift here to be my running back 2, and he could just pay off. Like, he's been a running back 2 or better in every single one of his NFL seasons. Ben Johnson just got obviously great running back production out of 2 better running backs in Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, but this is an offense I want pieces of, and I'm fine taking Swift here. Then for our last wide receiver, we go with Jacoby Myers. I think he just has a super high floor, has been very consistent. But the dude's been a wide receiver 2 in points per game in both seasons with the Raiders, and now he's getting easily the best quarterback play he's had while he's there in Geno Smith. So I think in round 8, it's a steal. We go 2 running backs with Zach Charbonnet and Bashal Tutin. Charbonnet more is like that, top tier handcuff, and then Bashal Tutin kind of an ambiguous situation with the Jaguars. And then we double hit both tight end and quarterback. Not great to use like 4 roster spots on quarterback and tight end, but I do feel very strongly about our running back and wide receiver rooms. So we go Jake Ferguson, Brenton Strange, kind of get more of that veteran and then unproven guy with Strange. And then we get some stacks with our weapons. So with Travis Hunter, we have Trevor Lawrence. With Drake London, we have Michael Penix. Doesn't feel great only having 4 running backs, especially because the room isn't like super stacked. But this is a spot where we could drop one of those quarterbacks, drop one of those tight ends after week 1, and pick up another handcuff option to give us some more depth there. Now moving into the 107, this is going to be another wide receiver start. We go Puka Nacua, Ladd McConkey with the first 2 picks. And then around 3, round 4, we're actually going to go back-to-back running backs. So Breece Hall, Amarion Hampton. These are both guys who I think are really solid values. And honestly, starting off our roster with 2 wide receivers in Puka and Ladd, and then our top 2 running backs in Breece and Hampton, I feel really, really solid about that start. Then we're going to look at the wide receiver position where we go with Teteroa McMillan, Jalen Waddle, Jacoby Myers. Love the upside that like these round 1 rookie wide receiver picks have. You could have that huge boom year, like a Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase. You could also have like that, solid kind of mid-level wide receiver 2 year like a Jalen Waddle. But I think it's a good situation, like the talent here with McMillan. Already talked about Waddle, talked about Jacoby Myers. Cam Scatabo in round 8 to be our running back 3. Ambiguous backfield, but has a fun skill set, like a big physical running back, could get those goal line looks, but also a very impressive pass catcher, especially given his size. Then our last wide receiver here, Josh Downs, in my opinion, one of the most undervalued players in fantasy this year. This is a young guy who in year 2, in a bad situation, was the wide receiver 28 in points per game. He might have better passing production out of the quarterback position with Daniel Jones. He commands targets at a very, very high level. Getting him as our wide receiver 6, in my opinion, is just, a great bargain. Couple more running backs, Jordan Mason, Bashal Tutin. We get Justin Fields again in round 11, really high on him as a late round quarterback pick. And then we close it out with 2 tight ends, Isaiah Likely, Mike Gesicki. Obviously, once again, not feeling great about the tight end position, but that is what we're sacrificing, kind of hitting those other positions. Likely's been very good when he's gotten the opportunities. It's just going to be a crowded tight end room with Mark Andrews. And then Gesicki on a good offense, but had that stretch last year where I think it was Higgins who was missing time, but when everyone's been healthy, has kind of struggled. So that tight end spot is definitely one that could get flipped, after week 1. And then the final mock draft here from the 108. I know some people might not like this. This is where I go with Christian McCaffrey. My top 7 are off the board. This could be Amon-Ra. This could be Nico Collins. This could be Malik Neighbors. For me, it is Christian McCaffrey. And then we get Brock Bowers to fall to us here at the 205. Like this could easily end up being the running back 1 and tight end 1 that you're just locking down in your first 2 rounds. So then we get serious about wide receiver. We go Rashee Rice, Devontae Adams, Zay Flowers, George Pickens. Really kind of interesting mix of wideouts here. You've got like the young guy who has a ton of upside coming off an injury. You have the older veteran going to a fun situation. You have Zay Flowers heading into year 3. Kind of seems like a higher floor, low ceiling option. And then George Pickens heading into a fun situation, but going from the wide receiver 1 to the wide receiver 2. To get our running back 2, I go with Caleb Johnson in round 7. I'm not a big Caleb Johnson guy, but I think you look at the state of the running back position. You have like Tyrone Tracy, Jalen Warren, Najee Harris. Those are the next 3 running backs off the board. I think Caleb Johnson is a clear step ahead of those guys, and I don't think he has a ton of upside, but I just think you know what you're getting out of him. He's going to be the early down back. He's going to get decent volume on the ground. He's going to have some touchdown upside, working in on the goal line, and that's fine to be your running back 2 in a team that is a stud tight end 1 and 4 really solid wide receivers. And then we get 2 more nice wide receivers in Jawan Jennings and Josh Downs, probably like my favorite round 8 and round 9 values. Then we go Jordan Mason in the 10th round to be our RB3. We get a quarterback here in Dak Prescott, a later round option. Not my typical go-to, but in my opinion, the best guy available. And you have the stack with George Pickens. Hopefully both those guys boom. And then we just continue to hit the running back position. J.K. Dobbins, Jalen Wright, Jarquez Hunter. And I think any concerns you could have about Caleb Johnson and his early season usage, you feel better having a guy like J.K. Dobbins, where they're probably going to be on like, different trajectories where J.K. Dobbins might start off as the starter and then lose work to Harvey as the season goes on. Caleb Johnson probably going to gain in work and, take more and more opportunities away from Jalen Warren if he even starts off right in a lesser role. It's possible he's just the clear number 1 from day 1. But that is going to wrap it up for this final mock. Overall, you feel good about the RB1 spot. I like our wide receiver depth. Obviously, we're going to kill it at tight end, and then a fine, serviceable quarterback, someone who could easily finish like a back end QB1 in a solid season. And so that is going to wrap it up for this video. Hopefully this helps you go out, attack your drafts, nail the correct players early on in your drafts, and then some different ways to kind of build out the rest of your roster. But thank you all for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one.